By the time the snow reached her windowsills, Edris Halver would understand something she had spent 69 years refusing to consider. That belonging is not a fixed address, and love does not stay inside the lines you draw for it. But on the evening Mallow came back, she did not understand any of that yet. She understood only the scratch at the door, 3 times, barely audible above the wind coming off the fields east of Harlow, Minnesota, where the plains flatten into something so wide and so cold in January that the darkness feels less like the absence of light and more like a presence all its own. She had been sitting at her kitchen table with a library book open in front of her, a habit she had kept long past her retirement 4 years ago, reading with a pencil in hand, occasionally underlining sentences she found structurally imprecise. The scratch came, and she set the pencil down, and something in her rose that she could not immediately name. She did not rush. Edris did not rush toward things. She had built a life around that. She closed the book, smoothed the bookmark into place, and walked through the front hall in her wool socks to the door. She turned the deadbolt. She pulled the door open against the suction of the cold. The wind hit her first. It always did in Harlow in January, that flat, unbroken prairie wind with nothing between it and your face but 40 miles of frozen field. She squinted against it, and then she saw him. Mallow, standing on the top porch step, not moving, not calling out to her, just standing there in the full dark of the January night, smaller than she remembered, his tabby coat dulled and roughened by 3 weeks outside, his paws showing the small scuffs of long walking. Snow had settled along his back and was not melting the way it would have melted on a warm animal. He was cold through. She did not say his name. She stepped back and held the door open. He walked in, and it was only when she reached down to gather him, only when her hands felt the weight of his neck, that she found the ribbon. Blue satin, tied carefully, and below it, rolled and tucked and fastened with a small knot, a piece of paper. Her hands stopped. She stood in the hallway, with the cold still pouring in through the open door, the wind lifting the hem of her housecoat, and she looked at the paper the way you look at something you are not sure you want to open. Because some things, once you know them, change the shape of everything before them. She closed the door. She carried Mallow to the kitchen table, set him down under the overhead light, and unrolled the paper with fingers that were not quite steady. The handwriting was small and careful, the kind that belongs to someone who writes slowly and means every word. "Please don't be upset." He kept coming back. He chose to. Edris read the note twice. Then she set it on the table and looked at Mallow. He looked back at her. His eyes were the same clear amber they had always been. He did not look guilty or confused. He looked like himself. He looked, if she were being precise about it, like he had completed something. She felt her chest tighten in a way she did not like. To understand what those 3 weeks had cost her, you need to understand who Edris Halver was before Mallow came through her door the first time and before he left it. She had spent 33 years as head librarian at the Harlow Public Library, a 2-story brick building on Elm Street with a green copper roof that had turned over the decades the exact color of old sage. She had catalogued every acquisition by hand until the county required the switch to digital in 2009, and even after that, she had maintained a secondary card catalogue in her office that no one but her ever used and no one but her ever needed to use. She knew where everything was. That was the point. She knew where everything was, and she kept it there. She had been married to a man named Gerald Halver for 22 years. He had been a quiet man, a good man, the kind of man who brought coffee to her desk without being asked and then returned to his own work without requiring acknowledgement. They had not had children by choice and then by time, and the choice had eventually stopped feeling like a loss and become simply the shape of their life. When Gerald died of a cardiac event at 61, sudden, clean, no prolonged suffering, which was the only mercy in it, Edris had spent 3 months doing what needed to be done, the paperwork, the service, the dispersal of his things. Then she had reorganized the house. She did not move anything that had been Gerald's to the basement or the donation pile. She simply found the proper place for each item and put it there. The fishing rods in the garage, cleaned and hung. The coffee mug with the chipped handle to the back of the cabinet. The wool peacoat on the hook by the back door, which still smelled like him in the cold months, which she pretended not to notice. She reorganized. She continued. That was what she did. She was not a cold woman. People in Harlow knew her for 33 years of quiet attentiveness, the way she remembered which patron had been reading which series, the way she kept the large print section freshly stocked without being asked because she understood that some needs were not announced. She gave. She was simply precise about how she gave and from how much distance and in what portion. Malow had come into her life the January before last. He had appeared at her back door on a night when the temperature dropped to 16 below and the snow had been coming sideways for 6 hours. He did not perform distress. He sat outside the glass of the storm door with the patience of something that already knew it would be let in. She held out for 20 minutes, then she opened the door. She told herself it was temporary. She posted notices in the library. She called the vet's office to ask whether anyone had reported a missing tabby. She said to her neighbor, Tressa Von, who could hear everything through the shared wall of their duplex, I have a cat in my house and I am looking for his owner. Tressa Von had looked at her with the expression she kept for things she found obvious and said nothing. No one claimed him. After 3 weeks, exactly 3 weeks, which she had not noticed at the time but which struck her now with a particular sharpness, she bought a bag of food from Henriksen's Hardware, which carried a small selection of pet supplies in the back corner, and she did not post any more notices. She named him Malow because he was the color of the hollyhock and cream wallpaper in the upstairs hallway, a soft, uncertain gray with warm undertones, and because the name had a quality she appreciated. It was 2 syllables, easy to call from a distance, and it was not the kind of name that would embarrass either of them. He settled into her life with a precision that suited her. He knew what time she rose. He waited outside the bathroom door with the patience of something that had decided this was simply how mornings went. He slept at the foot of her bed in winter, on the chair by the east window in summer. He went out in the morning through the cat door she had installed in the mudroom, returned by early afternoon, and did not stray past the yard. This was the agreement. She had not known she was making an agreement. But she had made one, and Malow had honored it, and the household had its order, and that was fine, until it was not. The morning of the disappearance was a Wednesday in late November. She had opened the mudroom door at 7:20 to check on the water bowl she kept on the back step in cold weather, and she had noticed that Malow's food dish from the night before was untouched. She stood in the mudroom for a moment. Then she went to the cat door and pressed it open and looked out at the yard. Empty. She told herself he was in the garage, which he sometimes was. She checked the garage. She walked the perimeter of the yard. She stood at the back fence and looked into the alley. Nothing. She went back inside and had her breakfast and read for 2 hours and checked the yard again. Still nothing. By that evening, something cold had settled in her that had nothing to do with the weather. She was not a panicking woman, but she was also not a woman who lied to herself, and the honest truth was that by the second morning she knew something was wrong. Malow did not simply stay out. He had never, not once in the year she had had him, stayed out overnight in November. The temperature had been 8 degrees. He was a domestic cat, not a barn cat, not a cat with any demonstrated appetite for outdoor adventure. He was simply gone. She made a sign on her computer, 1 sheet of paper, black text, a photograph she had taken in October of him sitting on the kitchen table in the afternoon light, looking slightly inconvenienced by the camera. She printed 7 copies and taped them to telephone poles on her block. Bannock Doyle, who delivered the mail on Elm Street and the 4 adjacent blocks, stopped when he saw her putting up the 3rd one. "That your cat?" he said, chin toward the paper. "He's been out since Wednesday," she said. Bannock was a compact man in his 50s, with a broad face and the perpetually reddened nose of someone who worked outdoors in Minnesota winter without vanity about it. He tucked his mailbag more firmly under his arm. "I'll keep my eyes open," he said. "I go through 20 blocks a day. I'll keep looking." She thanked him, precisely, not effusively. She did not lean on people, and she was not going to start leaning on the mail carrier. But she was glad someone else was looking. Tressa Von came to the door that evening. She held a covered plate, something in a casserole dish, smelling of onion and thyme. "I heard," she said. "It's only been 2 days," Edris said. Tressa was 62, a retired dental hygienist who had an opinion about most things and expressed it without particular preamble. She held the casserole out. "I know it's only been 2 days," she said. "The food isn't about the cat. It's because you haven't been eating properly since Gerald died, and a crisis is when you eat worse, not better." Edris looked at her. "Take the plate," Tressa said. Edris took the plate. She did not point out that Gerald had been gone for 6 years and that she ate perfectly adequately because the casserole smelled very good and she was, in fact, not hungry but would need to eat, and Tressa was not wrong about the general principle. She simply set the dish on the counter and did not say anything else about it, and Tressa nodded as though a conversation had been completed and went back through the shared wall. The first week dissolved into the cold. She searched. She walked the neighborhood in her good boots, past the Methodist church, past the grain elevator at the edge of town where the wind came through the alley hard enough to make you grab your collar, past the small park on 2nd Street where the city had put up an ice rink in December for the past 4 years. She called his name in the specific pitch he recognized. She waited. Nothing. It was Bannock who brought the first piece of information. He knocked on her door on a Friday, his day off, she noticed, wearing his own coat instead of his postal one. "Had a conversation on Sycamore this morning," he said. "Woman on the north end says she saw a grey tabby cat about 10 days ago near Old Birch Road." Edris stared at him. Old Birch Road was 6 blocks away. Mallow had never, to her knowledge, crossed the 2 streets that separated her block from Old Birch. He did not leave the yard. "Are you sure?" she said. She was specific about the description, Bannock said. White chin, one ear that tilts, the white chin, yes, the slight forward tilt of the left ear. "Old Birch Road," she said. "North End," he said, "near the field where they store the salt trucks in winter." She thanked him, and he left, and she stood in her doorway for a full minute in the cold without noticing the cold. Then she got her coat. She found the tracks 2 days after Bannock's visit, after a thin new snow. She had walked Old Birch Road 3 times already, looking for nothing in particular and finding it, and then on Sunday afternoon, on the north shoulder of the road where the gravel met the winter grass, she found paw prints pressed into the fresh snow. Small, deliberate. Going north. She crouched down, her knees protesting the cold gravel, and looked at them. The prints moved in a straight line along the shoulder, not the wandering, looping trail of a lost animal. They moved as if something had a direction and was going in it. She followed them for half a block before they petered out at a stretch of cleared pavement. But north of that cleared stretch, the road curved, and beyond the curve, she could see the roofline of a house she had never had any reason to visit. A modest house, white siding, a front ramp, the proportions of a place where someone lived carefully within a small compass. She went home and thought about it for a day. Then she went back. The woman who answered the door was perhaps 40, with dark hair pulled back and the brisk, tired alertness of someone managing a great deal without assistance. She introduced herself as Mirev Ashlan. She was a home care aide, she explained. She had been expecting someone, though not precisely Edris. "I thought someone might come eventually," Mirev said, stepping back to let Edris in from the cold. The house was warm and smelled of chamomile tea and the particular wooden smell of old furniture in a heated room. The hallway was narrow, the doorways wide, the floors clear of anything that might catch a foot. The specific, organized openness of a space arranged for someone whose body required care. "He's in with her," Mirev said, her voice lowered. "He's been in with her most days." Edris followed her through the hallway to the front room. The woman in the chair was perhaps 75. Small, folded slightly forward, the way some people fold when the body becomes an ongoing negotiation. Her name, Mirev had said on the walk down the hall, was Kalis Thorne. She had been living here for 8 months, since her daughter had arranged the care placement. She had not been well. She had not been much engaged with the world around her, and the world around her in that house was limited. But when Edris stepped into the front room, Kalis Thorne was not looking at the wall. She was looking at Malow, who was sitting on the rug at her feet, his front paws tucked under his chest, watching Edris come through the door with the precise attention of someone taking stock of a situation. Edris stopped. Malow turned his face back toward Kalis. He did not go to Edris. He did not rise. He simply redirected his attention as though Edris's arrival had been noted and filed, and the more important matter was the woman in the chair. Kalis reached down with one hand, slowly, and rested her fingers on top of his head. Edris watched this. Something happened in her chest that she could not name quickly. "How long has he been coming here?" she asked. Her voice came out more level than she expected. 3 weeks, Mirev said. "The first time, I tried to shoo him off. We don't have animals here, but he came back the next day, and the day after. He never comes through a closed door. He sits outside until someone opens it." "How does he get in?" Mirev looked slightly embarrassed. "I started opening it," she said. "And Kalis," Edris began. "She started eating better," Mirev said quietly. "About a week after he started coming, and she started responding to me, just small things. A nod, eye contact." She looked at the woman in the chair, whose fingers were moving slowly through the cat's fur. Before that, she hadn't been responding to much. The room was very quiet. The wind pressed against the storm window. Outside, the grey January afternoon was deepening toward grey January evening. Malow shifted slightly on the rug, settling his chin onto his front paws, still watching Kalis. Her hand kept moving. Edris stood in the doorway for a long time, without saying anything. "Before we continue, I want to take a moment to talk to you. YouTube has decided that our channel does not meet their requirements to be supported by their platform. We believe this is a mistake, and we are fighting it. But right now, the only thing keeping Paws and Whispers alive is the love you have for these stories. If our videos have ever touched your heart, consider making a small donation. Even $1 helps us keep going. Just being here, watching and caring, already means the world to us. The donation link is pinned in the comments below. Thank you." She brought him home that evening. She tucked him into the carrier she had not used since the vet visit in October and drove the 6 blocks in the dark without speaking. She carried the carrier inside and set it on the kitchen floor and opened the latch. Malow walked out, looked at the kitchen, looked at the carrier. Then he walked to the window that faced north and sat down and looked at the dark. Edris watched him. She poured herself a glass of water. She took the blue ribbon, which she had removed before putting him in the carrier, and put it in the kitchen drawer with the rubber bands and the extra batteries. Then she found the note and folded it once and put it on top. She closed the drawer. She told herself, he is home, he is safe, and that is what matters. He lasted 4 days. On the morning of the 5th day, she came downstairs at 7:20 to find the cat door in the mudroom swinging in its frame, the faint percussion of it knocking against the foam weather strip in the cold draft. She stood in the kitchen doorway in the dark and listened to it knock and understood without going to check that he was gone. She sat down at the table. She did not get her coat. She did not walk to Old Birch Road. She sat at the table with her hands flat on the wood and let herself feel what she was feeling, which was something in the neighborhood of helpless and which she liked not at all. After an hour, she got up and made her coffee and went to her library book. But she did not open it. She sat with it closed under her hand and looked out the window at the bare locust tree in the backyard, its branches stripped to their essential architecture, and she thought about Gerald's coffee mug in the back of the cabinet, and Malow sitting at Kalis Thorne's feet, and the way Mirev had said she started eating better, the particular weight those 4 words carried, and she thought about the difference between a rule that protects something and a rule that merely reassures the person who made it. She did not reach any conclusions, but she thought, the campaign to keep Malow inside lasted 9 more days and cost more than she had anticipated. She blocked the cat door with a folded bath towel wedged tight. He sat in front of it for 2 hours, then looked at her with a quality of patience she found, and this surprised her because she was not given to anthropomorphizing, profoundly polite, as if he were giving her time to reconsider on her own. She did not reconsider. She went to bed. At 3:17 in the morning, she checked the clock. Because she always checked the clock when she woke at unusual hours, she heard a sound from the mudroom, a low, sustained sound, not a distress call, more like a question asked very quietly, but without any intention of stopping until it was answered. She lay in the dark for 11 minutes. Then she got up, went to the mudroom, and removed the towel. Malow did not go out. He looked at the cat door, then up at her, then walked back through the kitchen and lay down on the rug near the radiator. Tressa Von heard about the blocking of the cat door. She heard about most things. The walls were not thick, and knocked the next afternoon. "Let me ask you something," she said from the doorway, without coming in. Edris waited. "When Gerald had that teaching job in Duluth, the 1 year when you were both younger and he had to drive back and forth and you didn't like it, what did you do?" "I don't see what that has to do with—" "What did you do?" Tressa said. Edris looked at her. "I drove up on Thursdays," she said. "So we had more time." Tressa nodded. "Right," she said. "You didn't like it, but you adjusted to it because the thing you didn't like was still good for him and for you." She pulled her cardigan closed against the cold draft from Edris's open door. "I'm just saying." She left. Edris stood in the hallway for a moment. She found Mallow in the kitchen, sitting in front of the window that faced north. "You're impossible," she told him. He glanced at her, then back at the window. It was Bannock who suggested she walk with him. He did not put it that way exactly. He came to the door on a Tuesday, not his route day, which meant he had gone out of his way, and said, "I've been watching his timing when I do my route. He goes north between 10 and past. I thought you might like to know." Edris looked at him. "Why would I want to know that?" Bannock considered this with the honest deliberateness of a man who did not rush his sentences. "I thought maybe you'd want to see for yourself," he said. "Where he goes, how he goes." She did not answer right away. She was thinking about Gerald driving back and forth to Duluth, and she was thinking about Tressa, and she was thinking about the note in the kitchen drawer. He kept coming back. He chose to. "Tomorrow," she said. 10 o'clock. Bannock nodded. "I'll be here." The cold that morning was the proper January cold, not the dramatic record-setting cold that brought news cameras, but the steady, accomplished cold that had simply decided to stay. The temperature was 4 below. The sky was white from edge to edge, the kind of white that gave no information about where the sun was. The snow on the sidewalks had been compressed by foot traffic into a surface that squeaked under boots. Mallow went out through the cat door at 10:07. He came around the side of the house at the front, stopped when he saw both of them waiting on the porch, regarded them for a moment, and continued north. They followed him. He walked at a pace that Edris found, despite herself, easy to match. Not a cat's usual variable speed. The bursting and stopping, the sudden attention to invisible things. He walked steadily, staying to the right side of the sidewalk, moving away from the curb when a car passed, ducking briefly behind a fence post when a dog barked from behind a gate, and then continuing without breaking stride. He crossed 2 side streets at the safest crossing points where the curb cuts were. Edris watched this and said nothing. But she was watching very closely. "He knows the route," Bannock said quietly beside her. "Yes," she said. "He does." There was no warmth in that, not yet. But there was something, a kind of precision she recognized. A life organized around something that mattered. Mallow turned the corner onto Old Birch Road. He walked to the White House at the north end. He sat down at the base of the front ramp and looked at the door. The door opened before he had been there a full minute. Mirev saw Edris on the sidewalk and paused, one hand on the door. "You can come in," she said, "if you'd like." Edris hesitated. She was aware of Bannock beside her, not pressing, not suggesting. "Just present." "Yes," she said. "Thank you." The visits became, she would not use the word routine, though Bannock used it without apparent irony, a pattern. 3 times a week, on Monday, Wednesday and Friday, Edris walked to the house on Old Birch Road and sat in the front room with Kalis Thorne while Mallow distributed himself between them. Kalis did not speak. She was beyond the words, Mirev had explained, in the particular way of some people in the later reaches of illness, present in a non-verbal way, responsive to touch and tone and proximity, but no longer organized around language. She was still there. She was simply there in a different register. Mallow seemed to understand this register precisely. He would sit with Kalis for 40 minutes, sometimes closer to an hour, and then, without any visible signal that Edris could detect, he would rise, stretch, and move to the chair beside Edris and sit facing her. She had started bringing the library book she was currently annotating. She would read quietly, and Mallow would sit nearby, and Kalis would sometimes close her eyes and breathe with the specific rhythm of someone who has been settled. There was one afternoon, a Wednesday she was nearly certain, when she looked up from her book and found Kalis looking at her. Not through her, at her. She held the gaze. She did not speak. She simply held it. Kalis made a sound that was not a word. It was short, soft, something between an exhale and a note. Edris thought of the card catalogue in her old office. The way she had maintained it, not because it was required, but because she believed that knowing where things were was its own kind of care. That order, real order, was made for the people who needed to find something. She did not know what she was finding here, but she came back on Wednesday, and Friday, and Monday, Hastai. The practical conflict arrived on a Thursday afternoon in the third week of her visits, in the form of a phone call from the county licensing office, a recorded message actually, which she played back twice to be certain she had understood it correctly. Harlow County had a one-pet-per-dwelling ordinance. This had existed for decades and had never applied to her because she had never had a pet before Malow. The ordinance required registration of all domestic animals, with annual renewal. She had not registered him. She had not known she needed to. The message was a courtesy notice, not a citation. Someone had submitted a complaint about an unregistered animal. She had 30 days to comply. She stood in the kitchen with the phone in her hand and thought about who might have submitted a complaint. She thought about Tressa, which was ungenerous, and then she felt a small, cold clarity. Tressa would not have done it. Tressa had been bringing her casseroles. She called the licensing office the next morning. Yes, registration required a home visit. Yes, the home visit would include a welfare assessment of the animal's living conditions. Yes, 30 days. She registered Malow. She scheduled the visit. She paid the $40 fee with the equanimity of a woman who had paid county fees for decades and expected nothing pleasurable from it. But it sat with her, the complaint. She had not been careless. She had not been irresponsible. She had simply not known. She found herself, at dinner that evening, looking at Malow on the rug near the radiator and feeling the particular unease of someone who has been reminded, by external authority, that what feels like her own arrangement is also subject to other people's decisions. She did not like this feeling, but she recognized it. 2 days later, a Saturday, she came home from Henrikson's to find Malow sitting at the kitchen window with his back to the room. Not the window that faced north, the window above the kitchen sink, which faced east, toward the grain elevator and the edge of town and the long, flat white of January fields beyond. He was very still. His tail was wrapped around his paws. She set the grocery bags down and looked at him. He did not turn. She put the groceries away, milk, bread, the small bag of coffee she bought weekly, and measured out in a way that made one bag last exactly 8 days. And when she was done, she poured herself a glass of water and stood at the sink and looked out the same window Malow was looking out, though from slightly above him and at a different angle. The fields, the long, white, flat, specific emptiness of Minnesota winter fields, broken only by the distant line of a windbreak, bare trees in a row the color of charcoal against the white sky. She had looked at this view for 26 years. It had never before required her attention. She looked at it now, until Malow moved. He turned from the window, stepped from the sill to the counter to the floor in 3 precise moves, walked past her to the front of the house, and sat down at the front door. He looked at her over his shoulder. She dried her hands on the dish towel. "I know," she said. She got her coat. What happened at Kalis Thorne's house that afternoon was not dramatic. Nothing that happened in that house was dramatic. The drama of that house was entirely interior, compressed, slow, weighted in the way that the most significant things are always weighted. Mirev met her at the door with an expression that said something had changed. Kalis was not in her chair. She was in her bed, Mirev explained. She had been very tired that morning, and they had decided to let her rest. But she had not been sleeping well. She had been restless. She had not eaten since Thursday. "She keeps looking toward the door," Mirev said. Edris went to the bedroom doorway. Kalis was on her side, facing the door, her eyes open and unfocused. Her hand was on the coverlet. Malow walked past Edris's legs, across the bedroom floor, and jumped onto the bed in a single, smooth arc. He walked to Kalis, turned in a small circle, and lay down beside her. He pressed the length of his side against hers. Kalis's hand moved. She found his back. She rested her hand on it. Her eyes closed. Edris stood in the doorway for a long time, long enough that her feet began to ache in her boots. She did not sit down because there was no chair near the door, and she did not want to move into the room and disturb whatever was happening, which was real and quiet and none of her business, and somehow also entirely her business. She thought about Gerald's peacoat on the hook by the back door, the way she had put it there and never moved it, because moving it would have been a kind of announcement, and she was not prepared to announce. She thought about all the things she kept in their right places. And she thought about Mallow, not the cat on the bed specifically, but the idea of him, an animal who had decided where he was needed and had gone there without ceremony, 6 blocks through a Minnesota winter, until someone let him in. Not because anyone asked, not because there was a rule, because there was a need, and he had the means. And he went. Mirev appeared beside her and touched her elbow gently. "She's settled," she said. "She hasn't settled like this in days." Edris nodded. They went to the kitchen, and Mirev put the kettle on, and they sat at the small table and drank tea and did not talk about anything important, which was itself a form of something important. Outside, the January afternoon was going blue at the edges, the sky above the leafless elms darkening in the particular layered way of midwinter, when the cold makes itself visible in the air itself. Bannock knocked at the door. He had walked over, Edris realized, because he had known she came on Saturdays now, and Mirev let him in, and he stood in the kitchen doorway with his hat in his hands and said, "Everything all right?" "Yes," Edris said. He nodded. He sat down at the table with them. Mirev got him a cup. They did not talk about Kalis. They did not talk about Mallow. Bannock said there was weather coming in Monday, serious weather, the kind the farmers watched. Mirev said she had been meaning to get more firewood, but the delivery was backed up. Edris said she had a neighbor with a cord of split wood from last fall who might sell some. Practical things, small arrangements. The kettle went cold, and Mirev made another pot, and outside the sky finished going dark, and the streetlight at the end of Old Birch Road came on and threw its particular circle of orange light on the snow. Mallow appeared in the kitchen doorway. He looked at all 3 of them. Then he walked to the back door and looked at it. "Time to go. Let me get his coat," Bannock said, which was not a joke exactly, but it lightened the room, and Mirev laughed a small, tired, genuine laugh, and Edris felt the corner of her mouth lift in a way she had not planned. The next 12 days were calm, which meant something was coming. She knew this, the way she had always known it, not by any particular sign, but by the quality of the ordinary. Things continued. Mallow made his walks. She made hers. She brought her book on Mondays and Wednesdays and Fridays and sat in the front room with Kalis and read quietly and watched. Kalis had a good week, 2 good days, specifically, where she was alert and took her meals willingly, and once on a Friday made eye contact with Edris for long enough that Edris said, "Good afternoon," and Kalis replied with something that was not quite a word, but was clearly the same category of thing. Tressa, meeting her at the shared door one evening, said, "You look different." "I look the same," Edris said. Tressa considered this. "Different from the way you looked 3 weeks ago." Edris went inside and thought about that for longer than she wanted to. Bannock had taken to texting her when he spotted Mallow on his route, just a time stamp and a street name, a small dispatching service he had invented without being asked. 1014 Old Birch Corner. She had not told him she appreciated this, because it would have been awkward, but she had started keeping her phone in her cardigan pocket instead of on the kitchen counter, which was a concession she did not examine closely. And then 2 days with no text. She noticed the first day and said nothing to herself about it. By the second day, she was at the kitchen window at noon, watching the yard. Mallow was gone. Not on a walk, gone. The food dish untouched. The cat door unmoved since morning. She knew his absence the way she had known Gerald's absence, not as a sound, but as a quality of the air in the house, something altered in the pressure of ordinary silence. She went to Old Birch Road. Mirev met her at the door with an expression that confirmed it. Mallow had not come. "She's been asking for him," Mirev said, and then caught herself. Not asking, she can't ask, but looking, going to the door. She went to the door twice last night. Edris stood on the porch in the wind. "I'll find him," she said. She said it the way she said most things, with more certainty than she felt, because sometimes certainty is an act of will and not a report on current conditions. Martin Prince. The storm that had been coming since Monday arrived that night. It was a proper Minnesota blizzard, not the coastal variety, not the glamorous kind, but the relentless inland kind that comes without drama and simply accumulates, the wind driving the snow horizontal so that it moved like a living thing. And by midnight, the drifts at the base of the front porch were level with the second step. The windows flexed in their frames. The power went out at 2 a.m. and came back at 3. Edris lay in bed listening to it and was afraid in a way she had not been afraid in 6 years. She knew where he was not. She did not know where he was. She thought, if he is outside in this, he is in serious trouble. She thought, I should have. And then she stopped the sentence there because she had learned by now that the should have sentences had no useful ending and she did not have time for them. In the morning, the storm had eased to flurries. The world was buried. The temperature had come up slightly, to 11 above, which in context felt almost forgiving. She got dressed. She got her boots. She got her heaviest coat, the one she wore when she went to the hardware store for the sidewalk salt in February. Bannock was on her porch when she opened the door. He was wearing his postal issue gear, the cold weather uniform, the full kit, and he had a shovel. I already did your walk, he said. And the path to the car. She looked at him. I figured we'd need the car, he said. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she stepped back and let him in and got her keys from the hook. She was not a woman who leaned on people, but she had been thinking, in the long night, about the difference between leaning and being held, about the distinction Tressa had made without making it, about the Duluth drives and the adjustment that was not defeat, about Malow walking 6 blocks through January, not because he was lost, but because he had somewhere to be. She thought, I have somewhere to be. Let's go, she said. Bannock saw him first, a small shape in the snow at the base of a cedar hedge on the corner of 3rd and Maple, barely visible against the white. The drifts had built up along the hedge line overnight, and Malow had wedged himself into the hollow space where the lowest branches met the ground, out of the wind, his fur thick with snow that had not fully melted, his eyes open and alert and fixed on the car as it came around the corner. Edris was out before Bannock had fully stopped. She walked through the drift in her good boots, which were not quite equal to 18 inches of Minnesota snow, and crouched at the base of the hedge, and Malow looked at her. He did not look frightened. He did not look lost. He looked like someone who had been waiting with appropriate patience to be found. She reached under the lowest branch and gathered him up. He was cold, genuinely cold, the deep cold of an animal who had been outside in serious weather. But he was alert, and she could feel his heart steady under her hands. She stood up and pressed him against her coat and walked back to the car. And Bannock had the back door open, and she got in with Malow still against her chest, and Bannock drove without being told to the animal hospital on County Road 7. Dr. Neva Strand was a small woman in her 40s who had been Mallow's vet since the beginning and who looked at him now on the examination table with the practiced calm of someone who had seen a great many cold cats in 20 years of Minnesota practice. He's hypothermic, but not severely, she said. His core temperature is lower than I want, but his cardiovascular response is good. She pressed her fingers along his sides, checked his pads, looked at his eyes. The pads are chilled but no frostbite. He was smart, got himself sheltered before it got to that point. She looked up at Edris. How long was he out? 2 nights, Edris said. Dr. Strand nodded without judgment. You'll want to warm him gradually at home. No heating pad, just blankets and body heat. He'll sleep a lot today. Give him small amounts of food and water when he wakes. He should be back to himself by tomorrow. He is back to himself, Edris said. Dr. Strand looked at Malow, who was sitting up on the examination table despite the warming blanket the vet tech had placed around his shoulders, looking at the window with the settled attention of a cat who has completed a difficult errand and is ready to discuss what comes next. Dr. Strand smiled, just briefly. Yes, she said. I suppose he is. She kept him inside for 3 days after the storm. This time she did not block the cat door. She did not make rules. She simply sat in the kitchen more than usual and found things to do, letters to write, a section of shelving in the hall closet that had needed reorganizing for 2 years, and Malow stayed close. He was tired. He slept for most of the first day, curled in the specific tight circle he used when he was cold, and she covered him with the wool blanket from the living room chair and did not comment on the fact that the blanket now smelled entirely like cat. On the second day, he ate normally. On the third day, he sat in front of the window that faced north and looked at it for a long time. She watched him look at it. She thought about what she had been in the car, coming around that corner on 3rd and Maple, the specific quality of her fear, which had not been about losing him the way she had feared losing him when he first disappeared. It was different. It was the fear of someone who had let something matter, fully matter, without the buffer of managed distance, and was now exposed to all the cost of that. It was the fear of someone who had opened a door she had not known she was keeping closed. She recognized it because it was the same feeling she had had standing in Gerald's hospital room in October of 2018, when the doctor used the word cardiac, and the rest of the sentence stopped reaching her, the feeling of a person discovering that they had, without deciding to, given something enough importance to break them. She had not broken then. She would not break now. But she also understood, standing at the kitchen counter on the 3rd morning after the storm, that she could not go back to the way things had been. Not because Malow would not allow it, because she would not. Because she had walked through a blizzard drift in her good boots and held a cold cat against her chest and driven to the vet with Bannock Doyle at the wheel, and she had not once wished she had not. She was not a woman who made decisions twice. On the 4th day, she opened the cat door. She did it at 10:02, 8 minutes ahead of Mallow's usual departure time, and she went to the front room and sat in her chair with her book open in her lap and listened to the sound of him going through the mudroom, and she did not go to the window. She read for 40 minutes. Then she put the book down and picked up the phone. She dialed Mirev's number. "How is she today?" she asked when Mirev answered. "Better," Mirev said. "He got here about 15 minutes ago." "Good," Edris said. There was a small pause. "Mrs. Halver," Mirev said carefully, "I want to say something if that's all right." "Go ahead." "What you've done, coming here, the visits, she's been better these past weeks than she's been in months." The doctor noticed. He asked me what changed. A pause. I told him we'd had some help. Edris was quiet. "I know it hasn't been easy," Mirev said. "For you." "It has been fine," Edris said. Mirev said nothing for a moment, and Edris understood that Mirev was too tactful to contradict her, which was the correct response. "I'll be there at 2, Edris said. "I'm bringing a book." "I'll have tea ready," Mirev said. Edris hung up and sat for a moment with the phone in her hand. Outside, the sky was the flat, clean white of post-storm Minnesota winter, the kind of white that was almost blue in certain light, the kind that hurt to look at and was beautiful in the way that painful things sometimes are, honestly, without apology. She set the phone down. She went to get her coat. The 3rd week of February arrived with the particular quality of light that Minnesota people learn to read before they learn to read anything else. The angle is changing. You cannot say precisely how or where, but something in the quality of the afternoon has shifted by a degree that registers not in the eyes, but somewhere behind them, a cellular memory, older than language. The light is coming back. The town of Harlow felt it. Bannock started walking his route without his balaclava. Small thing, significant thing. Tressa Von began to leave her kitchen window cracked an inch when the temperature came above 20, which it had started doing by mid-afternoon most days. On Old Birch Road, Mirev had begun putting Kalis's chair closer to the window in the afternoons, so the light came in across her hands. Kalis held her hands in it on those afternoons, turned them slightly, the way cats do, meeting warmth. Edris noticed this on a Wednesday visit and did not comment on it because it did not require comment. It required only witnessing, and she was learning, not comfortably but genuinely, that witnessing was its own form of presence, that sometimes you did not need to catalogue or organize or solve. Sometimes you simply needed to be the person in the room. Malow, on the same Wednesday, did something he had not done before. He was on the rug in his usual position near Kalis's feet when he stood up, crossed the room to Edris's chair, jumped into her lap, turned once, and settled. Edris held very still. She was aware of Mirev in the kitchen doorway, and of Kalis in her chair, and of the afternoon light coming through the window, and of the specific, unrepeatable weight of a cat who had decided where to be. She did not say anything. She put her hand on his back carefully. He pressed into it. The licensing home visit happened on the last Friday in February. The county officer was a young man named Trent Hollis, polite and slightly nervous in the way of young men sent to assess the households of older women who give every indication of taking no nonsense. He checked Mallow's vaccination records, which Edris had arranged in a labelled folder. He looked at the food and water stations. He checked that the cat door was appropriately sized and weather-sealed. He wrote something on his form. Then he looked around the kitchen, the labelled folder, the organised counter, the small basket near the radiator that held Mallow's blanket, and he said, with genuine and slightly unprepared sincerity, "He's clearly well looked after." "Yes," Edris said. "He is." Trent Hollis wrote something else on his form. "Mrs. Halver," he said, still looking at the form, "someone filed a complaint in December. I can tell you it was anonymous, but I can also tell you that in 22 months in this job, anonymous complaints about well-maintained animals in orderly households very rarely come from people with legitimate concerns. Usually they come from people who don't like some change in the neighborhood that they can't quite put into words." He looked up. "The file is closed. Everything is in order." He left. Edris stood in her kitchen for a moment. She looked at Mallow on the rug. "Well," she said. He blinked at her. She made herself a cup of tea and sat at the table and thought about who she had been in December and who she was now and whether they were the same person, and decided that this was the kind of question she did not need to resolve by Friday. Some things you simply note and carry forward. Mau surprise. It was Tressa who asked the question, eventually. Of course it was Tressa. She came to the door on a Sunday evening with a jar of pickled beets she had made in October and had been intending to bring over since Thanksgiving, and she stood in Edris's hallway looking at the kitchen and said, "You seem like you're doing something different." "I visit someone," Edris said. "Who?" "A woman on Old Birch Road." Tressa looked at her. "Since when do you visit people?" "Since January," Edris said, which was accurate and not the whole of the answer, but was enough. Tressa set the pickled beets on the hall table and crossed her arms, not in a challenging way, just in the way of a woman who is about to say something she has been holding for a while. "I submitted that complaint," she said. "In December. The licensing one." Edris stared at her. "I know," Tressa said. "I know how that sounds, but I was worried." She paused. "You weren't registering him. You weren't taking any of it seriously. You were acting like he was a guest who might leave any minute, and I thought, if you formalized it, if there was a file, a record, something official, you'd have to commit. And if you committed, you'd stop treating him like a problem you were managing instead of a cat you loved." The hallway was very quiet. Edris looked at her for a long time. "That was an entirely unacceptable way to handle that concern," she said finally. "I know," Tressa said. "I'm sorry. You could have simply said something. Would you have listened?" A pause. "Probably not," Edris said. Tressa nodded, with the expression of a woman who has known she was right about something for 8 weeks and finds no particular pleasure in being confirmed. Edris picked up the pickled beets and carried them to the kitchen, and after a moment Tressa followed her, and they sat at the table, and Edris found 2 small plates and opened the jar, and they ate the beets with rye crackers and talked about the weather coming in and the state of the windbreak trees on the east edge of town and a library sale that was happening at the end of March, and it was the longest time they had spent together in the 6 years since Gerald died, and neither of them mentioned that. Mallow came in through the cat door at 7:30. He looked at Tressa with the polite assessment he gave to most people, and then he walked to the radiator and lay down. Tressa watched him. "He's something," she said. "Yes," Edris said. "He is." Kalis Thorne died on the 3rd of March, on a Sunday in the early morning. Mirev called Edris at 8 o'clock. The call was brief. Mirev's voice was steady, the voice of someone who had prepared for this and was managing it with professional care, though Edris could hear, underneath the professional care, the sound of someone who had also cared as a person. She thanked Mirev. She said she would like to attend the service when arrangements were made. She said she was sorry. She hung up and sat at the kitchen table. Mallow was at the window that faced north. He had been there when the phone rang. He was still there. He was looking at the white street below, the bare elm across the road, the early grey light of March coming in from the east and catching the snow at an angle that made it look almost warm. Edris looked at him. She thought about what Malow had done, and she found, sitting in the quiet kitchen on that Sunday morning, that she could understand it now in a way she had not been able to in November. Not because she was wiser, because she had spent 3 months watching it happen, and what she had watched was this: a creature who had found someone in need of a specific kind of company and had walked 6 blocks through January to provide it, again and again, until the providing was no longer needed. Not because anyone asked, because he could. She was not Malow. She knew that. She was a woman who had spent 69 years organizing things and keeping them in their right places and maintaining the careful, precise distance that prevented the worst kinds of loss. She was not about to become someone who knocked on strangers' doors on principle. But she had spent 3 months sitting in a room with a woman she had never met, reading her library book, and it had not, in the end, cost her what she had thought it would cost. It had cost something, but not that. She stood up. She filled Mallow's water bowl. She stood at the window beside him for a moment, looking at the same street, and the morning came in around them both. CTA. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to talk to you. These stories exist because of this community, because of you. And right now, YouTube has denied our monetization, which means the only thing keeping Paws and Whispers alive is the love you have for these stories. If our videos have ever made you feel something, if they've brought you comfort, joy, or just a moment of peace, consider making a small donation. Even the minimum makes a huge difference to us. The link is pinned in the comments below. Thank you for being here. End CTA. Spring in Harlow came the way it always did. Not announced, not dramatic, but cumulative. The snow compressed itself into grey ridges along the curbs and then diminished day by day into patches and then into nothing. The ground appeared, brown and flat and slightly stunned, the way the ground always looked in that first week of exposure, surprised by its own return. The elm across the road from Edris's house put out the first tentative shapes of buds, small and pointed, and the particular reddish color of new elm growth, which most people never noticed because they were not in the habit of looking. Edris was in the habit of looking. She had gone back to the library, not as an employee, but as a patron, which was a different thing and had taken some adjustment. She went on Tuesday mornings and spent 2 hours with the new acquisitions section, sometimes making notes in her small notebook about titles she thought the collection was missing, which she then passed to the head librarian, her former assistant, a careful young man named Davis, who received the notes with the right combination of respect and independence. She did not pretend to still be in charge, but she had opinions, and they were good opinions, and Davis knew this. She had also, on the last Tuesday in March, signed up to volunteer at the County Senior Services Office on Maple Street, which ran a program of weekly visits to homebound residents. She had not done this because of Kalis. She had done it because the form was there, on the bulletin board near the library entrance, and she had looked at it for 3 weeks and then taken it down and filled it out. Her first assignment was a man named Earl Burgess, 81 years old, widower, former feed store owner, who lived on the east end of Harlow in a house that smelled of machine oil and old newspapers. He did not like conversation. He liked chess. Edris played chess. She was not bad at it. She went on Thursdays. On the first genuinely warm Saturday of April, warm meaning 52 degrees, which in Harlow was warm enough for anyone, Bannock Doyle knocked on her door in the morning. He was not in his postal uniform. He was wearing a flannel jacket and carrying, slightly awkwardly, a small potted plant, a geranium, brick red, in a clay pot. "For the porch," he said, "when it's warm enough." She looked at the geranium. "I didn't know what you had," he said. "For the porch. I didn't notice a plant there." "I don't have one," she said. "Right," he said. So, she took the geranium. She looked at it for a moment. It was a good plant, healthy, well-branched, the specific red of old brick in late afternoon light. "Thank you," she said. "You're welcome," he said. He stood on the porch for a moment longer than departure required. She was aware of this. She was also aware that she was holding a geranium in her doorway on a Saturday morning and that Mallow had appeared behind her legs and was looking at Bannock with the assessment he gave to people he had already categorized as acceptable. "There's a diner on 2nd Street, she said. "They do a decent breakfast on Saturdays." "I know the one," Bannock said. "I was thinking of going," she said. A pause that lasted exactly long enough. "I could drive," he said. "I can walk," she said. "It's 3 blocks." "I know," he said. "I can walk 3 blocks too." She set the geranium on the hall table just inside the door and got her coat from the hook, the everyday coat, the navy one, not the storm coat, and she stepped out onto the porch, and Bannock stepped back to give her room, and they went down the porch steps together into the April morning, which smelled of wet earth and something green that was beginning, not yet visible, just audible, the faintest possibility of warmth in the air, the way spring always came, below the threshold of certainty, already present. When they came back 2 hours later, breakfast had become coffee, had become a conversation about the grain elevator's new ownership and Davis's plans for the library's summer reading program, and a story Bannock told about a dog he had once on his route that could identify him by scent alone from the end of the block. Mallow was on the porch railing. He was sitting facing south, which was unusual. He sat there with his paws together and his tail hanging loose over the edge of the railing, and he was watching something in the direction of the Maple Street Park that neither of them could identify, his eyes tracking with the specific, interested attention of a cat who has found something worth following. Edris came up the porch steps and stood beside him. She looked south down the block. She could not see anything particular. A car, a woman walking a dog. The bare park at the corner, beginning to show the first faint green at the edges of the grass. She looked at Mallow. He kept watching. She leaned against the railing beside him, her shoulder almost at his level, and she looked south too, for a long time, patient and unhurried, not needing to know what he was watching to find it worth the looking. The morning was around them both. The light was the specific April light of the upper Midwest, clear and young, not yet the full strength of summer, still carrying in it the memory of winter, which was not the same as winter's weight. The elm across the street had put out its buds fully now. They moved in the light air, small and red and patient. Mallow's tail hung over the railing edge, still, completely at ease.